We hear this word floating around all the time in HR manuals and performance reviews, you know, professionalism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually treated as this neutral, universal thing, sort of like learning Excel,
Yeah.
something everyone just has to pick up.
But that assumption is exactly what we're here to challenge. The sources you sent for this deep dive really push back on that.
They really do.
Our mission today is to look at code switching in corporate America and to move beyond this idea that it's just some kind of individual choice.
Okay, so let's unpack that right away. Our sources suggest that this idea of professionalism,
Hmm.
it's not neutral at all.
Not even close. Historically, it often just tracks whiteness.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we're talking about things like speech patterns, hair standards, even, how you're supposed to show emotion. It sets a default.
A default that forces other people to adapt.
Exactly. And that creates this powerful dual impact. First, it sort of dictates who gets access to these high-status jobs.
Yeah,
And
okay.
second, it automatically puts certain forms of cultural expression at a disadvantage. So code switching becomes this adaptive response to those institutional norms.
So before we dive into the data, let's just define what we're talking about. In a corporate context, what exactly is code switching?
It's pretty comprehensive. It's not just about the words you use.
Right.
Research defines it as adjusting your behavior to reduce stigma and increase your perceived fit with the dominant culture. So that means your tone of voice, your facial expressions, your mannerisms.
Even your appearance, like your hairstyle.
Absolutely. And even censoring cultural references that you might use at home.
And that feeling, that necessity to adjust, is something so many professionals feel. But what really struck me in these sources was the hard data.
Mm-hmm.
It confirms just how widespread this is.
The numbers are, they're pretty staggering. If you look at that big survey from Indeed and Harris Poll, the behavior is just wildly disproportionate.
Let's just put the numbers out there because they really tell the story.
Go for it.
Okay, so according to that data, only 12% of white employees said they code switch at work. 12.
Okay.
But for black employees, 34%.
Wow.
That is nearly 3 times the rate.
And it's not just about doing it right. It's about feeling like you have to.
Exactly. Almost half of black professionals, 44%, said that code switching is necessary for them at work.
And for white employees?
Only 22% felt that necessity, half the rate.
So I think a listener might hear that and think, okay, but doesn't everyone adjust how they talk at work? You speak differently to your CEO than you do to your friends.
That's a fair question, and it's partially true. We all adjust our register.
Right.
But what the data shows is that for marginalized groups, the stakes are totally different. The change isn't just about vocabulary. It's about core parts of your identity.
And the Harris poll really dug into the why behind it, and what they found is it's critical.
It's tied directly to the fear of consequences.
Exactly. 40% of black professionals said that if they stopped code switching, they believed they'd face negative career consequences.
Things like getting a bad performance review or just being passed over for a promotion.
Yes. So this completely shifts it from a communication choice to a high-stakes requirement for survival, for your economic survival.
And we also see this is really concentrated among people who are most invested in that professional track.
How so?
Pew Research found that nearly half of black college graduates feel like they have to change the way they talk around people of other races.
So it's not about a lack of preparation or anything like that. It's about navigating the environment.
And the Lean In report found a really specific gender dimension here, too.
I saw that. Black women are more than twice as likely as women overall to report code switching.
Specifically, their mannerisms, their tone, their speaking style, all of it.
So when you put all those numbers together,
Right.
the 34% rate, the 40% who fear penalties, the fact that it's concentrated among college grads and black women, you realize this isn't some small effect. It's a huge structural pattern where success is basically tied to conforming.
It's not a communication quirk.
No, it's a systemic defensive mechanism.
Which brings us to the structural drivers.
Right.
We know it's happening. We know it feels necessary. But why? Why is the corporate world set up this way?
Well, the research, especially from places like Harvard Business Review, points to 3 big overlapping reasons.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is what you'd expect: professionalism signaling.
Just trying to reduce that feeling of difference.
Exactly. To avoid those immediate biased judgments that can just kill a career before it starts.
And the second driver?
Is stereotype management. This is actively working to push back against negative tropes.
Like the angry black woman stereotype.
That's the classic example in the research, having to constantly manage your tone so you're not labeled with that because it's so career limiting.
And the third one is about the long game, about getting ahead.
Right. Access to networks and promotions. The research is pretty clear that perceived similarity to the people in power is, well, it's a key that unlocks those doors.
To really get why that pressure to blend in is so intense, we have to look at the bigger picture. That McKinsey analysis on the black experience in the private sector was really eye-opening.
It provides such powerful context.
It does. They document these persistent drop-offs as you go up the corporate ladder.
Right. Black employees might be, 12 or 14% of entry-level staff?
Yeah, but that number just plummets. It drops at the manager level, and by the time you get to senior leadership, it's down to 4 or 5%.
The higher you look, the wider it gets.
And that scarcity is combined with what McKinsey calls the trust deficit.
Explain that.
It means black employees are just less likely to believe that promotions are fair. They're also less likely to think that all the company's DEI efforts are actually, effective.
So that's where these two things merge.
Exactly. You look up, you see very few people who look like you,
Yeah.
and you don't trust the formal system, to be fair.
So the message is clear.
The message is conforming, adapting, blending in. That feels like the safest bet, the only reliable path forward.
So really, the takeaway here is that code switching isn't about an individual's communication skills. It's an intentional, very high-effort adaptation to unequal risk in the system.
Okay, so now let's talk about the cost. The corporate tax that people pay every single day, this psychological and cognitive burden.
It is relentless. Because the effort here is so much more than just, deciding not to talk in a meeting.
Right.
The sources describe it as this continuous high-intensity mental process. You're always monitoring, always recalibrating in every single interaction.
It's literally consuming your working memory. And think about what that means for you, the listener. It means every time you're in a meeting, you're not just doing your job.
Right.
You're running two parallel programs in your head. The actual work and this exhausting task of self-monitoring and performing.
And that cognitive load has a real measurable impact, which gets to the question of what is the direct personal toll of all this?
And the Harris poll had a really stark answer for that.
It really did. 23% of black professionals reported that code switching had actively harmed their mental health.
That's nearly 1 in 4 people saying this required workplace behavior is causing them direct psychological harm. That's not sustainable.
And beyond just the mental health stats, there are huge social costs.
Like burnout.
Massive burnout. It comes from never being able to be your authentic self. You're constantly editing, and that is just exhausting over time.
And here's the irony. While you're trying so hard to fit into this dominant corporate culture, it can actually create friction for you outside of work.
HBR noted this, the idea of in-group policing.
Right, getting accused by people in your own community of acting white. So you have this corporate burden and a social burden. There's no safe space.
And that is exactly where this concept of identity strain comes in, this intense forced split between your home self and your work self.
This isn't a new idea, though. This maps directly onto a concept that's been in America for generations.
You're talking about W.E.B. Du Bois.
Exactly. His idea of double consciousness.
Yeah.
The feeling of always measuring yourself through the eyes of a society that devalues you.
And in the modern workplace, this plays out very directly when the only way to get promoted is to adopt dominant white norms. A certain way of speaking, a certain emotional reserve.
Right.
It implicitly ranks parts of black cultural expression as being less professional, less worthy. Things like directness, certain types of humor, AAVE, natural hair.
It reinforces what's called respectability politics.
For listeners who might not be familiar, what does that mean here?
It's the unspoken rule that to get ahead in a powerful institution, you have to distance yourself from the cultural traits of your own marginalized group. You have to prove with your behavior that you're one of the good ones.
And when you're forced to do that constantly, the institution isn't just taking up your time, it's reinforcing a cultural hierarchy where parts of who you are treated like liabilities. That is a huge tax to pay.
Okay, so that brings us to our last section. Before we get to solutions, we have to add some important nuance here.
Yes. It's really critical not to flatten this into only a story of harm.
That's right. For a lot of people, code switching is also a sign of incredible skill.
It is. It's high-level communication dexterity. It's deep audience awareness. It's strategic. It's a powerful skill that can unlock doors that would otherwise be slammed shut.
But this is where it gets really interesting. The issue isn't the skill itself. The real tension is between coercion and choice.
Right.
And when we remember that 40% of Black professionals fear negative consequences if they start doing it.
That fear, that signals coercion. It's not a neutral choice if the penalty for being authentic is having your career stall out.
So the responsibility has to shift away from the individual and onto the organization. They need to fix the system.
So what can they actually do? What are the levers an organization can pull to reduce the need for all this?
The first, and maybe the most important step, is to attack the vagueness where bias loves to hide. You have to redefine professionalism.
This is so crucial. Companies have to get rid of these subjective bias magnets like executive presence or culture fit
And replace them with what?
with concrete behavioral things relevant to the job. Don't judge presence, judge their ability to deliver results or to clearly explain a project. Vague criteria just invite bias.
Okay, so that's number one. What's number two?
You have to move beyond just diversity checkboxes and actually work to normalize difference.
So just hiring more diverse people isn't enough.
It's not enough if the culture still punishes them for being themselves. Inclusion means making sure that difference is seen as a strength, not a problem to be fixed.
And the third lever?
Is training managers on the mechanisms of policing itself. So specific training on linguistic bias and what's often called tone policing.
Right, because the sources said the most common changes people make are to their language and their tone.
Exactly. Those are the areas where that culture fit bias hides most effectively in a performance review.
It's just such a profound contradiction when you think about it.
How so?
Black innovation drives so much of mainstream culture, style, language, music. But that same cultural expression is often penalized in the workplace under the guise of executive presence. That asymmetry needs to change.
So to quickly recap for you, our listener, code switching is a disproportionate burden. It's linked to measurable mental harm, and it's driven by vague professional norms and deep structural inequality.
And the solution isn't asking people to adapt more. It's forcing organizations to change how they define success.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to take with you. If this pressure to conform at work is so intense, it doesn't just stop at 5 p.m. That pressure can actually influence how language is passed down through generations. What parents tell their kids about how to speak at school versus at home, whether a dialect like AAVE is treated by families not as legitimate but as a career risk.
So if corporate norms are powerful enough to shape language choices outside the workplace,
What does that really tell us about the true scope and the true cost of corporate power?